All right, let's dive into the world of Bob Camblin. This is going to be interesting. You've sent over a whole bunch of his quotes, which are, well, pretty wild, and some descriptions of one of his watercolors, untitled #38. Plus, get this, even some interpretations of it through Zen philosophy and the I Ching. This could be fun.
It is fascinating stuff, isn't it?
Yeah.
We've got all these different ways of looking at him, his words, his art, these ancient systems of thought. It's like we're putting together a puzzle, trying to understand how Bob Camblin, how he actually saw the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's start with those quotes. I mean, you're right. They're full of these really strong statements about art. Like, he says art is essential for survival, but he doesn't mean like, staying alive in a literal sense.
Exactly. He saw art as this really vital way of dealing with how chaotic life can be, almost like a life raft. It helps us make sense of the world, deal with our emotions, and in the end, survive on a deeper level, or an emotional and spiritual level.
He's not afraid to, like, contradict himself either. Like, he'll say things like, when understood, all truth is funny, or I didn't learn anything new, but I know a lot more now. Like, what does that even mean?
I think he's sort of playing with us there, challenging us to think outside the box. What he's saying is that truth can be profound and absurd at the same time. And sometimes the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know anything.
Right.
It's like he's poking fun at the whole idea of being certain about things. Like, hey, let's embrace the mystery of it all.
Mm. And that playful, that paradoxical way of thinking, it runs through so much of what he says. Like, he talks about the artist as a free agent, but then he also acknowledges these pressures of what he calls a disposable art culture. What did he mean by that?
I think he was worried that, in our fast-paced world, art was becoming just like everything else, something we consume quickly and then toss aside.
Mm.
He saw this obsession with what's new, this pressure to always be churning out new work as something that could stifle real creativity.
So for him, art wasn't about chasing trends or like trying to please the critics.
No, he saw those things as distractions, really. He actually compared critics to legless men who teach running, which, ouch, that's a bit harsh. But I think his point is that real art, it comes from a deeper place inside you, from this inner need to create. And it can't be judged by, some external standard. Yeah.
That's so interesting because, like, in another quote, he says, art is a form of communication. So it's not like he's saying it's completely separate from the world, right?
Absolutely not. It's more about finding that balance, between expressing yourself authentically, but not getting too caught up in what other people think.
Right.
It's about creating from a place of, integrity and just letting the work speak for itself.
Okay. Okay, I'm starting to get it. But before we, go too far down the rabbit hole of these quotes, let's shift gears a bit and talk about this watercolor, this untitled #38. You said you had some descriptions, so, paint us a picture. What are we looking at here?
Okay, so imagine this. You're standing on this rocky coastline, and the water is stretching out in front of you, this huge expanse of blue and gray, and it's constantly shifting, swirling. Jutting out from the shore, there are these massive, dark rocks, almost like ancient guardians standing watch over the sea.
Okay, yeah, I can see it. But is there a sense of movement to it, or is it more like it's still and peaceful?
Well, it's both. The descriptions really highlight this contrast between stillness and movement. The rocks, they represent stability, something permanent, like the unchanging parts of nature. But the water, that's all about change and flow. The eternal dance of life.
That makes me think of that quote where he talks about finding perfection, but on your own terms. It's not about, reaching some perfect, flawless state. It's more about embracing the imperfections, the contrasts, the interplay between intention and just letting go.
Exactly. And that idea, that joyous compromise, you see it woven through all of his work. His writing, his art, even his philosophy. Yeah. It's about finding beauty in those imperfections, in that tension between opposites. And it's so clear in untitled #38.
Okay, so it's not just a pretty picture of the coast. There's a deeper meaning in those rocks and waves.
There definitely is. And it gets even more interesting when we bring in those Zen and I Ching interpretations. Now, for those who aren't familiar with the I Ching, it's this ancient Chinese text. It uses a system of hexagrams. They're kind of like symbols made up of lines. And they offer insights into different situations and states of being.
Wow, okay. So how does that connect to Camblin's watercolor?
Well, one of the excerpts connects the painting to hexagram 48, the well. And this hexagram, it symbolizes renewal, sustenance, like the constant replenishing of resources. And it's
Yeah.
interesting because the ocean in the painting, it acts like a well, it's constantly washing over the shore, bringing life and nourishment. And the rocks, well, they represent the stable foundation, that inner strength we need to deal with all the changes that life throws at us.
Yeah, it's like that idea he talks about a lot, the mystic switch. It's not just about passively looking at a painting, is it? It's about really engaging with it, seeing it with fresh eyes, like maybe even tapping into a deeper understanding of ourselves.
Right, and he applied that same mystic switch concept to his own artistic process.
Yeah.
He talked about all these different kinds of drawing he did, action drawings for discovering things on paper, slow, analytic drawings for discoveries out in the world, and conceptual drawings for discoveries in the mind. Each one, it was like a key unlocking a different way of seeing.
So even in his process, there's this back and forth between control and letting go, trusting his intuition to lead him to new discoveries. It's almost like a Zen practice, isn't it?
It is, it really is. And speaking of Zen, the excerpt, it also mentions the influence of practices like Zazen on Camblin's work. Zazen is this form of meditation where you just sit quietly observing your thoughts and your breath. And, that same sense of quiet contemplation, you can feel it in Untitled #38.
Yeah, I can see that. There's this stillness to the painting, a sense of being grounded in the present moment, even with the water always moving. And the way he uses negative space, all that open sky and water, it's like he's giving us room to breathe, room for our own thoughts and feelings.
He was all about simplicity, stripping away what's not needed, getting down to the essence of things. And that's reflected not just in his art, but in his life, too. He talks about this concept of ecology of art, it's kind of mind-blowing when you really think about it.
Ecology of art, what's that all about?
Well, he believed that artists play this vital role in keeping the world in balance. It's like we're all part of this interconnected ecosystem. And our art, even if it seems self-indulgent, it actually contributes to the health and well-being of that ecosystem.
It's like we're all mirrors reflecting back to each other, influencing each other, contributing to this collective tapestry of human experience. And art is like this thread connecting us all, even across time and space.
Yeah, he even suggests that everyone is a mirror and that is magic. It's a beautiful thought, isn't it? This idea that we can reflect back to each other the beauty and wonder of the world and kind of amplify it, creating this ripple effect of inspiration and creativity.
Okay, so we've talked about the rocks and the water, the stillness and the movement, this idea of the mystic switch and the ecology of art. But what about those I Ching interpretations? We kind of left off talking about hexagram 48, the well. Is there another one?
Yes, there is. The YouTube video brings in another hexagram, 58, Joyful Lake. It's interesting because it shifts the focus away from renewal and sustenance and puts it on communication, harmony, and inner peace.
So one emphasizes this life-giving aspect of the ocean,
Yeah,
and the other focuses on its power to connect us, to bring us together.
that's it exactly. And maybe that's what Camblin was doing with Untitled #38, He's inviting us to see the painting through these different lenses, to consider all these interpretations, to find our own personal meaning in the work.
He's not giving us one single answer. He's giving us a bunch of questions, like a starting point for our own exploration, our own discovery. That seems very much in line with his way of thinking, right?
Absolutely. And this is where his ideas about looking versus seeing come in. He didn't just want us to glance at his art and move on. He wanted us to really see it, engage with it on a deeper level, to let it spark something inside us.
It's that mystic switch, again, right? That moment of insight, of connection, where we move beyond the surface and tap into something deeper, more profound. And I think that's what makes his work so powerful, so timeless.
He's not just making art, he's creating experiences. He's inviting us to be a part of that creative process, to kind of co-create meaning with him. And that's pretty powerful stuff.
Okay, this is really blowing my mind. So let's try to pull this all together. We've got this artist who thinks art is crucial for survival, who emphasizes this interplay between control and letting go, who challenges us to really see the world. He's influenced by Zen, uses these simple forms, talks about this ecology of art, and on top of all that, we have these I Ching interpretations that add like a whole other layer of complexity and meaning to his work.
It's a lot to absorb, I know, but it's also pretty exciting. It's like we're peeling back the layers of an onion, uncovering these hidden depths of his thinking and revealing the connections between his words, his art, and these ancient systems of wisdom.
But there's something else too, right? Something about his process, how he approached making art.
You're right. We talked about his love for experimenting, but there's more to it than that. He talks about fooling the eye, fooling the mind, and how that can lead to new discoveries and insights.
So he's not afraid to play, to take risks, to even break the rules. I'm starting to see why he called the artist a free agent.
Exactly. And that freedom, that willingness to push the boundaries, that's what allows him to create something truly unique, something that speaks to us on a gut level, something that bypasses language and connects with us on this deeper, more primal level.
He talks about this IRM, this inner rhythm movement that connects us all. And I think that's what he's tapping into with his art. He's reminding us that beneath the surface, beneath all the chaos and the noise, there's this pulse, this rhythm, this interconnectedness that binds us all together.
Almost like he's saying, hey, we're all in this together, let's dance.
I love that.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what's the key takeaway you think he'd want us to hold on to? What's the essence of Bob Camblin's message?
I think at its core, it's a message of hope and possibility.
Yeah.
He's reminding us that we have the power to create our own reality, to find meaning and purpose in a world that often feels chaotic and meaningless.
He's saying that art isn't just decoration, it's not just entertainment, it's this vital force, a tool for survival, a way to connect with something larger than ourselves.
And he's encouraging us to embrace our own creativity, to tap into that mystic switch within us and use our gifts to make the world a more beautiful, more compassionate, and more meaningful place.
It's almost like he's giving us permission to play, to experiment, to fail, to create without fear or judgment.
Exactly. And I think that's a pretty powerful message.
It really does feel like he's giving us this push to find that creative spark in ourselves. And it's not just about making art, right?
No, no, not at all.
It's about approaching life with that curiosity, that sense of wonder.
He talks about this idea of recreation, like breaking free from the mold, not letting history or the critics define who we are. He even worries that most, aesthetics these days are all about shock and recognition, not about contemplation.
Hmm. That's interesting because he's not anti-intellectual or anything. He just sees this difference between knowledge and really knowing something.
Right.
Like you could read every book about Zen, but that's not the same as actually experiencing it.
Yeah. He even compares how we often think to, two bits of a hologram arguing about which one is bigger instead of cooperating and, looking at the picture with more detail. We get so stuck in the details, we miss the big picture.
He seems to be saying that real understanding comes from experience. And for him, art was a way to process those experiences, to find meaning in them, and then, share them with other people.
And that's why his work is so full of symbolism and metaphor. Like, he mentions this standard sign against the sunset. It's not just a sign. It represents, accumulated knowledge, how we communicate what we learn.
Hmm. But then he also says straight up, knowledge does not and cannot educate. So what's the alternative? How do we learn, if not through knowledge?
Well, he says the feeling can't be transferred except by experience. It's like, that fish jumping out of the water. It doesn't know about water until it makes that leap. You have to actually get wet to understand it.
He's pushing us outside our comfort zones, and not just in art, but in life too.
Yeah, he even says in making the best of it, one should remember there are no mistakes. You're doing the best you can. It's about trusting your gut, taking action, even if you mess up.
That's actually pretty encouraging. It takes the pressure off trying to be perfect all the time. He also talks about time a lot, this idea of long silence and melting rocks and infinite space. It can be kind of overwhelming to think about, honestly.
Yeah, he sees time differently, cyclically. Everything kind of folds back in on itself. But within that, there's this incredible freedom. He says time travel is possible at the speed of enlightenment.
That's such a Bob Camblin thing to say. It's deep, but also playful, like he's winking at us.
He's pushing us to find our own mystic switch, to see beyond those limitations of linear time. It all ties back to his emphasis on recreation, constantly reinventing ourselves, breaking free from the past.
So we've got this artist who finds freedom within limits, who finds meaning in contradictions, who sees art as something deeply personal and also universally connected. It's a lot to wrap your head around.
It is. He's definitely challenging us, pushing us to think differently. He says people are conditioned to believe there's one right way to draw, but he wants us to resist learning, learn to fail, learn to relax, learn to feel, learn how to really think.
It's like he's saying, throw out the rule book.
Yeah.
Tap into that raw, intuitive creativity we all have inside us.
And when we do that, things happen. He talks about how when we're really absorbed in something like drawing or reading or listening to music, our rational mind might be thinking, okay, I'm doing this thing, but our natural flowing zazen mind is working on a deeper level.
And then the hunch, the inspiration, the solution, it just seems to magically appear. It's that mystic switch in action.
He even suggests that we often seek too hard and miss the way. True creativity comes when we let go, trust the process, and allow ourselves to be surprised.
There's so much wisdom in his words, even when they seem, paradoxical or like he's joking around. It's like he's saying, don't take yourself too seriously, but take your art seriously.
Mm-mm. He saw a real danger in this disposable art culture, this focus on what's new instead of what has substance. And he was worried about the influence of critics, those legless men teaching running, who can really stifle true creativity.
But in the end, he was an optimist, right? I mean, he believed in the power of art to change the world, to bring us together, to help us see things in new ways.
Oh, absolutely. He saw artists as like adults helping children look for Easter eggs,
Mm.
uncovering hidden truths and sharing them with the world. It's such a beautiful way to think about what art can do.
So after this deep dive into Bob Camblin, I'm feeling, well, a little overwhelmed, but also inspired. It's like he's opened up this whole new way of looking at art and at life itself, really.
Yeah, he's definitely given us a lot to chew on, and I think the best way to honor his legacy is to, take his advice to heart, embrace our own creativity, and keep searching for those mystic switches in our own lives.
You sent over all this amazing stuff, this collection of quotes, descriptions of untitled #38, and those interpretations through Zen and the I Ching.
Mm-hmm.
But it all comes back to you now. How do you see Camplin's work? What resonates with you the most?
That's the beauty of his art, isn't it? It sparks this conversation. It welcomes all these different interpretations. It's not about finding the one right answer. It's about engaging with the questions, the mystery, the wonder of it all.
Yeah, he probably loved that we're still talking about his ideas, still wrestling with them, still finding new meaning in his work. And who knows, maybe somewhere out there he's listening in, maybe chuckling to himself, saying, I didn't learn anything new, but I know a lot more now.